The grand hall of the Zizonian palace was as intimidating as its ruler. Jake Mercer, the scruffy human explorer who somehow found himself standing before the tyrant Queen Valantra, was trying not to sweat. The queen, draped in robes that shimmered like liquid metal, eyed him with an intensity that could melt steel. "You saved my empire," Valantra declared, her voice echoing off the towering walls. "Such bravery cannot go unrewarded." Jake smiled nervously. "Oh, well, it was nothing. Really. Just doing what anyone would have done." Valantra's lip curled in what might have been a smile. "Or a warning." "Nonsense. You will be honored in a way only the Zizonians can." Jake's relief was short-lived as a heavy door creaked open. Two guards, each resembling armored tanks with legs, escorted a tall, sharp-featured alien woman into the room. Her silvery skin shimmered under the palace lights, and her expression screamed irritation. "This," Valantra announced, gesturing dramatically, "is my daughter, Princess Zephyrine. A gift to you, human." Jake blinked, unsure if he'd misheard. "A gift? Like a medal or?" "No," Valantra cut him off sharply. "A companion. A symbol of our gratitude." Zephyrine crossed her arms, leaning lazily against one of the guards. "Don't worry, human. I come fully assembled. No instructions needed." Jake's face turned crimson. Your Majesty, humans don't exactly accept people as gifts." Valantra waved a dismissive hand. "She is more trouble than she's worth. Consider this an opportunity to tame her wild tendencies. Take her." Zephyrine smirked, pushing off the guard. "Tame me? Oh, this should be fun." "Look," Jake stammered, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'm not equipped for—" His voice trailed off as Zephyrine took a deliberate step closer. "Equipped?" Zephyrine tilted her head, her silver eyes gleaming with amusement. "What exactly are humans equipped for?" Jake's ears burned. "That's not what I meant." Valantra let out an exasperated sigh. "You saved my life. My daughter is your responsibility now. End of discussion." Before Jake could argue further, Zephyrine hooked her arm through his, her touch cold but surprisingly firm. "Lead the way, hero. Let's see what I've been gifted." He tried to pull his arm free, but her grip was unyielding. "This isn't. Look, I can't just take you with me." Zephyrine leaned in close, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper. "Afraid you can't handle me, human?" Jake stumbled over his words, earning a low chuckle from the princess. Valantra's voice boomed behind them. "Take her, or I'll reconsider the value of your life, human." With a resigned sigh, Jake led Zephyrine out of the hall, her mocking laughter echoing in his ears. As they walked through the palace corridors, Jake attempted to establish boundaries. "Just so we're clear, I'm not keeping you. This is temporary until we figure out how to undo whatever this is." Zephyrine gave him a sly smile. "Oh, I'm sure you'll find a way to make it permanent. Humans do enjoy their companions, don't they?" He stopped in his tracks, turning to face her. "You're doing this on purpose." "Doing what?" she asked innocently. Jake groaned. "Misinterpreting everything I say. It's like you're trying to embarrass me." Zephyrine tapped her chin thoughtfully. "You're quite entertaining when flustered. Perhaps I'll keep doing it." By the time they reached his small ship, Jake's patience was hanging by a thread. Zephyrine surveyed the vessel with a critical eye. "This is it? Humans travel in this?" "It's functional," Jake muttered, guiding her up the ramp. "Functional," she repeated, stepping inside. "Well, I hope your quarters are at least accommodating. I assume I'll be sharing the, what do you call it? Bed?" Jake nearly choked. "You're sleeping in the spare room?" Zephyrine raised an eyebrow. "Spare room? Is that what humans call it? How quaint." "Enough." Jake snapped, his face red. "You stay there. Don't touch anything. Don't break anything. Just, stay out of trouble." Zephyrin shrugged, clearly unimpressed. Relax, human. I won't bite. Unless you ask nicely. Jake stormed off to the cockpit, leaving Zephyrin to explore her new surroundings. As she wandered the ship, her curiosity quickly turned to amusement. Every piece of human technology seemed laughably simplistic to her, yet oddly charming. When Jake returned later to check on her, he found her holding a roll of duct tape. "What's this?" she asked, her tone laced with mockery. "Duct tape," Jake replied warily. She smirked. "Ah, a human bonding device. How resourceful." Jake groaned, running a hand through his hair. This was going to be a long journey. The hum of the ship's engines filled the air as Jake struggled to focus on the navigation panel. Behind him, Zephyrin lounged in the co-pilot's chair, her legs draped casually over the armrest. She had already commandeered the best seat, claiming it was her royal right. "So, human, where exactly are we going?" she asked, her tone laced with feigned boredom. "Somewhere far away from your mother's palace," Jake muttered, eyes fixed on the controls. Zephyrin leaned forward, her silver hair brushing against his shoulder. "Far away from the palace? Sounds romantic. Do humans always take their gifts on scenic getaways?" Jake sighed, resisting the urge to respond to her teasing. "This isn't a vacation. I need to figure out where to drop you off." Zephyrin clicked her tongue. "Drop me off? And here I thought you'd be more creative. Don't humans usually keep their prizes close?" He turned sharply to face her, his frustration bubbling over. "You're not a prize. And stop twisting everything I say." She smirked, clearly enjoying his reaction. "Oh, but it's so easy. Humans have such interesting ways with words. Like handling me earlier. Care to demonstrate?" Jake threw his hands in the air. "I give up. Do whatever you want, just don't break anything." Zephyrin hopped out of the chair, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Don't worry, I'll be gentle. For now." As she wandered off, Jake slumped back into his seat, muttering under his breath. Moments later, the sound of something metallic crashing to the floor made him bolt upright. He rushed toward the noise, only to find Zephyrin holding a wrench and inspecting the ship's toolkit. "What are you doing?" he demanded. She shrugged. "Your ship is fascinating. Primitive, but fascinating. I'm just exploring." Jake snatched the wrench from her hands. "This isn't a toy. If you mess with the wrong system, we could explode." Zephyrin's lips curled into a sly smile. "Explode? Sounds exciting. Do humans often take risks like this?" He groaned, placing the wrench back in the kit. "No, we don't. And I'd like to keep it that way. Now, please, just sit down and stay out of trouble." She tilted her head, as if considering his words. "Fine. But only if you show me how this duct tape works. You know, for bonding purposes." Jake's face turned beet red as she gestured to the roll of tape she'd found earlier. "It's not for that," he snapped. Zephyrin chuckled. "Humans are so sensitive. Relax, I'm only teasing." He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "Why me?" "Because you're fun," she replied, her voice light and mocking. "And because you have this adorable way of blushing when I talk." Ignoring her, Jake returned to the cockpit. He needed to focus on their next destination. The sooner he figured out where to take her, the sooner he could get back to some semblance of normalcy. But peace was short-lived. Zephyrin appeared behind him again, this time holding a device she clearly pulled apart. "Explain this," she said, placing the pieces on the console. Jake's jaw dropped. "That's the communicator. Do you realize how important that is?" She shrugged. "It wasn't doing anything. I thought it might need stimulation." "Stimulation," he repeated, horrified. "Yes, humans are always pressing buttons and fiddling with things. I assumed that's how your technology works." Jake grabbed the pieces, desperately trying to reassemble the device. You can't just touch everything you see. Zephyrine leaned against the console, her tone dripping with amusement. So many rules. Do all humans live with this much restraint, or is it just you? He ignored her, focusing on the communicator. After a few tense moments, the device crackled to life. Jake sighed in relief, but his victory was short-lived as Zephyrine poked at another button. Stop that, he barked. She raised an eyebrow. You're no fun, human. What's the point of having a ship full of toys if you don't play with them? They're not toys. Jake snapped, his patience wearing thin. Zephyrine leaned closer, her voice dropping to a playful whisper. Perhaps you need to loosen up. I hear humans can be quite creative when they want to be. Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. That's it. Stay here. Don't move. Don't touch anything. Just stay put. As he stormed off, Zephyrine's laughter echoed behind him. You're making this far too entertaining, human. Jake retreated to his quarters, shutting the door firmly behind him. He leaned against it, rubbing his temples. This was going to be a long, long journey. Zephyrine sat cross-legged on the floor, studying a holographic map Jake had displayed on the ship's main console. She tilted her head, pretending to be interested, but her smirk gave away her true intentions. So, you're just going to drop me off at the nearest habitable planet? Seems a bit impersonal, doesn't it? She teased, her fingers tracing the glowing lines of the hologram. Jake, busy recalibrating the ship's navigation system, didn't look up. It's not personal. It's practical. I'm not exactly equipped to deal with a royal stowaway. Her eyes sparkled mischievously. Equipped, again. You really love that word, don't you? He sighed. It's not what you think. Of course not, she said innocently, though the corners of her lips betrayed her amusement. But you might want to choose your words more carefully. Humans have such colorful phrasing. Jake gritted his teeth, determined to stay focused. I'm just trying to get us both out of this situation in one piece. Zephyrine leaned forward, her chin resting on her hand. And here I thought humans were known for their boldness. Yet, you seem to be running away from me at every turn. Is this normal human courtship behavior? His head snapped up, his face flushing. This isn't courtship. She raised an eyebrow. Oh. Then what would you call it? Rescuing me, giving me a place to stay, spending all this time together. If you're not trying to win me over, you're doing a terrible job at making it clear. Jake's jaw worked as he tried to form a response. Finally, he shook his head and returned to the console. You're impossible. I prefer challenging, she said, her voice full of mock sweetness. The silence that followed didn't last long. Zephyrines' curiosity, as usual, got the better of her. She reached out to poke at one of the controls on the map interface. Don't touch that, Jake said without looking. Zephyrine grinned. Why not? Will it explode? No, but it'll mess up our trajectory, and I'll have to recalibrate everything again. She pulled her hand back but couldn't resist adding, recalibrating sounds boring. Humans must have a lot of patience. Jake shot her a sideways glance. Some more than others. She chuckled, clearly enjoying his frustration. You're surprisingly entertaining for someone so uptight. Tell me, Jake, do all humans have this much self-control, or are you just special? He ignored her, knowing that engaging would only encourage her further. But Zephyrine wasn't one to be ignored. She stood up and began pacing the room, her movements deliberate and graceful. You know, she said, her tone light, in Zizonian culture, it's considered rude not to acknowledge a companion's presence. Jake sighed heavily. You're not my companion. She stopped in her tracks, turning to face him. Oh. Then what am I? Your guest? Your responsibility? Her lips curved into a mischievous smile. Your gift? He pinched the bridge of his nose. You're not a gift. You're a situation. Zephyrine burst out laughing. A situation? That's a new one. I like it. Jake shook his head, muttering under his breath. Why do I even bother? She sauntered over to him, leaning casually against the console. Because deep down, you're having fun. Admit it, human. You've never met anyone like me before. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. That's not wrong. She grinned triumphantly. See? I knew it. But that doesn't mean I enjoy it, he added quickly. Her grin didn't falter. Oh, you will. Trust me, Jake. By the end of this journey, you'll be thanking the stars that my mother gifted me to you. Jake rolled his eyes. Somehow, I doubt that. Zephyrine laughter echoed through the ship as she spun away, her silver hair catching the light. We'll see, she called over her shoulder, her voice full of teasing confidence. As she disappeared down the corridor, Jake allowed himself a small smile. She was infuriating, unpredictable, and entirely too clever for her own good. But there was something about her that made him feel alive. He shook his head, pushing the thought away. There was no time for distractions. He had a mission to complete, and that mission involved getting Zephyrine off his ship as quickly as possible. But as he returned to his work, a nagging voice in the back of his mind whispered that perhaps, just perhaps, this situation wasn't as unbearable as he liked to pretend. The ship jolted unexpectedly, throwing Jake forward into the console. Lights flickered, and an ominous alarm blared through the cabin. He scrambled to stabilize the controls, muttering a stream of curses under his breath. Zephyrine appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame as if the chaos around her were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Is this one of those human emergencies I keep hearing about? You seem tense. Not now, Zephyrine. Jake snapped, furiously typing commands into the console. She strolled in, completely unbothered. You really should relax. Stress isn't good for your species, is it? Something about shortened lifespans? Jake shot her a glare, sweat beading on his forehead. The reactor's overheating. If I don't fix it, we're both toast. Zephyrine tilted her head, her tone mockingly innocent. Toast? Is that another one of your charming human idioms? So vivid. He ignored her, focusing on rerouting the ship's power. Zephyrine, apparently unsatisfied with being ignored, stepped closer. What's the plan, Captain? Heroic last-minute save? A daring act of bravery? Jake groaned. The plan is for you to stay out of the way so I can fix this. She leaned over his shoulder, her voice dropping into a sultry whisper. But I thought you liked challenges. Isn't this where humans shine? Under pressure? Jake tried to concentrate, but her proximity and relentless teasing weren't helping. Zephyrine, I swear, if you don't move. The ship lurched again, and Zephyrine stumbled, grabbing onto Jake for support. They ended up tangled awkwardly, her arms wrapped around him as the alarm blared louder. Well, she said, her voice laced with amusement, this is cozy. Jake disentangled himself, his face flushed. Focus. I need to access the reactor chamber, and you're not helping. She straightened, brushing herself off. Fine. Lead the way, oh fearless leader. They made their way to the reactor chamber, Jake barking orders while Zephyrine followed with exaggerated boredom. When they arrived, Jake quickly assessed the situation. A valve was stuck, and the temperature gauge was in the red. He pointed to a lever. Pull that, and don't let go until I say so. Zephyrine raised an eyebrow. You want me to handle your lever? My, Jake, I didn't think we were at that stage yet. Jake closed his eyes, willing himself to stay calm. Just pull it, Zephyrine. With a theatrical sigh, she complied. You know, you could at least say please. Or thank you. Humans are supposed to be polite, aren't they? Jake ignored her, working furiously to reset the system. Sparks flew from the control panel, and the ship groaned under the strain. Any time now, Zephyrine said, her grip on the lever tightening. Or should I start making peace with the stars? Almost there, Jake muttered, sweat dripping down his temple. The reactor finally stabilized with a loud hiss, the alarm cutting off abruptly. Jake slumped against the wall, exhausted. Zephyrin let go of the lever and stretched dramatically. Well, that was invigorating. Do all human adventures involve this much chaos? Jake shot her a tired look. Only when you're around. She smirked, clearly unbothered by the jab. Admit it, Jake. You'd be bored without me. He didn't dignify her comment with a response, instead focusing on catching his breath. As they made their way back to the cockpit, Zephyrin kept up her relentless commentary. So, what's next? Do we celebrate our survival with one of those human rituals? I hear they involve bonding activities. Jake groaned. Zephyrin, for the last time, we're not bonding. She grinned. Not yet, maybe. When they reached the cockpit, Jake collapsed into his chair. Zephyrin, ever the picture of energy, perched on the armrest, watching him with an amused expression. You know, she said, her tone lighter now, you're not half bad under pressure. For a human. Jake raised an eyebrow. Was that a compliment? She shrugged. Don't get used to it. But, you did save the ship. I suppose I could acknowledge your competence. Briefly. Thanks, I guess, he said, too tired to argue. Zephyrin leaned back, her smirk softening into something almost genuine. You're more interesting than I expected, Jake. Maybe this little journey won't be so bad after all. Jake glanced at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. Coming from you, that almost sounds like a compliment too. Don't push your luck, she replied, but her smile lingered. For a moment, the ship was quiet, the chaos of the reactor incident fading into the background. Jake allowed himself to relax, even if only for a moment. Then Zephyrin spoke again, her tone mischievous once more. So, about that bonding ritual. Jake groaned, burying his face in his hands. I walked right into that one, didn't I? Her laughter filled the cockpit, light and teasing. Despite himself, Jake couldn't help but smile. It was going to be a long journey, but maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't be so bad.